Co-Chair of Public Affairs Cymru with Emma Henwood, and I'm an account manager at Grayling, where I provide strategic public affairs advice to a wide range of our clients. So I'm personally really excited to gain some insights during the session. So today we're going to be hearing from former First Minister Carwyn Jones and former member of the Senedd for the South Wales West region, Bethan Sayed, both great friends of Public Affairs Cymru. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. We really appreciate it. And leading the session today will be Chizomo Piri, Policy and Communications Partner at Carateg and our Events Officer. So I worked very closely with Chizzy during our time together in the trenches at NUS Wales, so I can assure you you're in very good hands. Today, we're going to be unpicking the election results. We'll be opening the floor to some questions and discussing the results and what they mean. Please feel free to pop your questions in the chat box. Chizzy will do her best to make sure they're answered. It's not every day you get the chance to ask questions by two people who have been so deeply involved in the Senedd in different ways, so please do make use of it. Ahead of the elections, I know I've been keeping my eye on all the polls as everyone else has. We had quite a few predicting a lot of different outcomes, with some suggesting the likelihood of a Labour Plaid coalition, with rumours of Adam Price as First Minister. Instead, as Carwyn Jones put it so well, we've perhaps seen a rally around the flag across the devolved and local elections instead, with the vaccine boost causing voters to repay their respective administrations in the ballot box for a difficult and challenging year. We have a new climate change ministry, a new health minister, a new economy minister, and newcomers to the cabinet as well. So with 2/3 of the cabinet being women, it definitely sets the scene for a potentially really interesting leadership election sometime this term, potentially. I'm going to hand over now to Chizzy, who will kick the session off. But thank you so much to everyone who's come. I hope you can find the session as useful as I'm sure I'm going to. And as always, please do get in touch if you are no longer a member and have happened to sneak in and want to update your membership.
Thank you so much for that intro, Gwyn, and thank you so much to Carwyn and Bethan for joining us this evening. We're really great. It's really great to have you with us. Just to kick things off, and before I do, I really encourage everyone to post any questions they have in the chat, and I'll do my best to get through them. But yeah, just to kick things off, I wanted to ask, what are both of your opinions of the election in general? What kind of feelings do you have? And we'll start with Carwyn.
Well, thanks for that, and evening, everybody. Well, it's clearly an election where incumbency was important. We saw across the countries of the UK support being given, by and large, to the governments that had handled the pandemic. So clearly that was a factor in Wales, as well as Scotland. We saw quite clearly, and a lot of England, not everywhere in England, but that was a strong factor. That said, of course, if the public had felt that the pandemic had been handled poorly, then the parties in charge would have received their due reward at the ballot box. But that was certainly a factor. Again, in Welsh Labour, we've been quite explicit for 15 years about wrapping ourselves in the flag, if I can put it that way, about having a strong Welsh identity that stops short of independence, but is Devo Max, and increasingly so, moving now to a situation where Mark is talking about home rule, which I entirely agree with. The idea that the UK should be a voluntary partnership of nations and not a state that is held together with control centralised legally in one place in Westminster, a parliament where, ironically, no laws apply, even though that parliament claims for itself the right to make the laws across the whole of the UK, not just in England. So that was an element. There's an element that I've always found, particularly in the valleys, where people will vote Labour because that's an expression of their Welsh identity, and we saw that happening again this time around. The Conservative vote increased. That was not unexpected, but it didn't reach the heights of the general election 2 years ago. And some people say to me, you shouldn't compare the two, but that's exactly what was happening in the media. The media were looking at the 2019 results and saying, well, how will the 2021 results compare with the general election? Every election gets harder for the incumbent party. You have to appeal more strongly to people. You have to convince people why you should still be there after so many years in power. All these things are difficult. Let's remember at the start of the election, I think one of the first polls that was published showed a Conservative lead in the opinion polls. As time went on, I had the feeling on the doorstep that people were swinging back to us as a party, and particularly strongly so in the last week. On the last day, and you can feel it sometimes when you're knocking up those voters who are your pledges and they've already gone out to vote and are telling you so, and they've gone out to vote pretty early. So the trend was there in the last week, but as politicians, we love to see trends that favour us that aren't real. So I always take these things with a great pinch of salt, but we did see that happening in the end. So the election result was unexpected in the sense that I didn't expect us to win 30 seats. As time went on in the final week, that I think was beginning to look more of a decent prospect. We came within a few hundred votes of winning 31 seats, which would have been an extraordinary achievement given the electoral system that we have. So, yeah, I mean, I have to say, I have to be happy with the result. You know, a lot was made that there would be people who would vote for parties who wanted to abolish the Senedd. That didn't happen. You know, none of them got elected, even though every opinion poll seemed to show that abolish at the very least would win 3, 4, sometimes 5 seats. That didn't happen. Clearly, people thought, hang on a second, regardless of whichever party we vote for, it's a good thing to have a Welsh Senedd, it's a good thing to have a Welsh Government, and we want to keep that and then be able to vote for a party of our choice. So that I have to say gave me some satisfaction as well. We didn't see the beginnings of a movement to get rid of our democracy, which is what it ultimately would have been. But 5 tough years ahead. You win an election, you're on a high, but there's one thing we know in politics: people don't want to know what you've just done; they want to know what you're going to do next, and that's where the challenges lie for any government.
Great, thank you so much for that insight. And Bethan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would start by saying thank you for inviting me. But I think for us as a party, I'm not going to lie, I'm going to say that, it was, not the election we'd hoped for. Obviously, we've got some new members and we've gained a few seats in regional areas, but it's not what the polls had anticipated. But as Carwyn Jones has said, we would always take that with a pinch of salt, and areas where we were supposed to be close, we weren't. But then in Ceredigion and other areas, we've increased our majorities. But for me, that's great. But as I've said in some of the media releases on the day of the election, that should be a given by now. We have to be winning seats across the valleys. That's where the votes are. And what can we do to appeal to those voters when, again, as Carwyn has said, Labour are parking their seat on that, nationalistic lawn. I'm pleased that we've pulled them some way towards this discussion. And that's why some people say, well, are you just a pressure group? Because I think quite a lot of the time we are a party that puts the national interest first. And then, I think Adam was asked, would you want to have an independent Wales, or would you want to, win the election? And he couldn't answer that question fully, because, I think it's about that for us. It's about how far can we pull the agenda towards getting more powers, and for other people to realise the potential that we can already see here in Wales. So obviously, I feel for people like Leanne Wood and Helen Mary Jones, who lost their seats. They're 2 very strong females in our group. But I'm very happy, of course, that the vote was against abolish the Assembly and those types of parties. I found the last 5 years quite difficult sometimes on committees when I was having to work with some former MSs on issues like refugees and asylum seekers. They just clashed with my beliefs. I also think, and I said it internally and externally in the party, and this is not an excuse for us not doing as well as we would have liked. I believed strongly that we needed to delay the election. We are a smaller party. We do not have a lot of the data. We rely on knocking doors. It did not suit us to have had it during a pandemic like this. Restaurants have only just opened today. We weren't able to knock doors for long enough for us to do justice to the campaign. And I kept on saying it before the election, but sadly, I don't think before the election we we did enough to say, look, you know, we've got to be fair to all parties. We're just not going to be able to do this. So, you know, it's easy to reflect, is it not? But I think, you know, we have to learn from this, and we have to find and put more resources into those areas where we want to make gains in the future.
That's really great. Thank you for that analysis. And if we stick with you, Bethan, I've got a question on the independence movement in Wales and how, you know, that gained a lot of momentum, you know, during the election and even before that, you know, with the rise, I think it was 39%, the BBC reported people are in favour of independence in Wales. With Plaid not doing as well as they'd hoped for, do you think that this will impact the conversation in Wales? And then to bring you in, Carwyn, afterwards, do you think that Labour needs to reassess its relationship with the independence movement? So if we stick with you first, Bethan.
Well, yes, of course, you know, it's heartening to see those polls and to see the rise in the support for independence. And people have asked me, well, do you think you put it front and centre too much, because that may have been detrimental to your vote? Well, then I say, well, in previous elections, we put it on page 42 or 35, and you've said we haven't put it front and centre, so we cannot win. And then I saw an article on Voices Wales, which said, you know, if we'd have put it much more, if we'd have said it more during this election campaign, allegedly they'd looked at lots of interviews and our candidates weren't talking about it enough. Had we done so, we would have gained more from those indie curious voters out there in Wales. So it's really, really difficult to tell. But what I will say is that there are, you know, Labour voters who are supportive of independence. And so I don't just see it as a Plaid issue. Of course, I think, you know, I would like people to vote Plaid for us to deliver independence. Of course, I am a Plaid member. But I think we have to be realistic. We've had Labour control here for all of devolution, and we have to have those ongoing conversations with Labour members who are similar to us in our politics on lots of issues about what type of Wales we can create for the future, and not alienate them, because I think that's where sometimes people will say, well, how shall I vote in this election? And then they're torn sometimes because of the style of debate that's had. So I don't think it's as easy as that. But what I will say, as somebody who came into politics from activism, as some of you did, is get involved in whatever, you know, grassroots group you feel more accustomed to, whether it's Yes Cymru or Undod or anything else, because I ultimately believe that that's the way to win it. You can't rely on political parties solely to do it, because often they don't do it in a creative way, or, you know, it's not as attractive. So, you know, it's only going to work really to get that referendum by doing it at a grassroots level.
Thank you for that. And Carwyn, just a question for you. Do you think that Labour needs to reassess its relationship with independence?
No, I don't think so. I think you know, Bethan has said many things that are quite true. There are a substantial chunk of Labour voters who are sympathetic to independence and would vote for independence if they were given the chance. But it's not the most important issue for them. You know, it's something of a side issue, but you know, I suppose you might say they're not hostile to the idea. I mean, if you were in Plaid Cymru, you might look at it as a triumph. The 20% of people voted for an out and out, you know, a platform of independence, which Plaid haven't really done since in the days of devolution. But I don't think it was that kind of election. I think it was an election that focused on the pandemic. It was, as it were, a flag-waving election, but people firmly supported the flag that was around Mark Drakeford, if I can put it that way, rather than the flag that was around Adam Price. I think the debate on independence in Wales is quite different from that in Scotland. In Scotland, there's a very, very sharp divide. You see, for example, people swapping votes between Labour and Conservative in Scotland to try and stop the SNP from winning. You don't get that in Wales. You know, the substantial number of Labour voters would see Plaid as their second party. The Conservative voters will see Plaid as their second party in rural areas. We don't have that division, and in some ways, that makes the debate healthier. You know, there'll be some, I'm not one of them, who would be particularly strongly in favour of independence. There'll be others like myself who are, to quote the phrase that Mark has used, home rulers, that won't go quite as far as having a sovereign state. and a seat in the United Nations, if I can put it that way. But this is all part of the debate that I think we're bound to have in the future, and we're bound to have it because it's been driven that way by Westminster. We have a government in London that's utterly determined to impose a type of Britishness on people that they've created in their own image. It's not a Britishness I recognise or I want to be part of. A kind of empire unionism, as Kevin Brennan put it. I think that identity can be expressed in a far more effective, voluntary way, and a way that reflects the spirit of partnership. My fear is, as somebody who doesn't support the union in its current form, who thinks it does have to change in order for it to be sustainable in the future, my great fear is that we have this rampaging bull of union jackery, if I can call it that way, and that is being presented as the only form of British identity that's seen as acceptable to the current Tory government. And I think that is a good way to rip the UK apart in the next decade.
Oh, thank you for that answer. Sticking with you then, Carwyn, we've had a question come in on the chat. About the media in Wales, and what is your opinion on it being a devolved matter and how that would benefit Wales directly?
Oh, Bethan and I have been here on the committee and looked at it. Well, let's look at it. I mean, first of all, our print media is not strong. I think it's getting stronger now. I mean, the National has launched now. I'm going to plug that as I write weekly column for it. We've seen Nation Cymru, for example. We've seen Herald's and other. We've seen some new publications starting. I think that's really healthy. I think it's important not to just have the Western Mail and the Daily Post, the important they've been for many, many years. So that's encouraging to see that level of it's quality journalism done with, very few people. So they do a pretty good job of it, given the resources that they have. In terms of broadcasting, what I always wrestled with, logically, you would say S4C should be devolved. It's a Welsh language channel. It should be devolved. There are funding issues that are not so easy to resolve. But if you make that choice, you then start saying, well, let's devolve public service English language broadcasting as well. And that takes you into another step. I think the very difficult bit comes when you start saying, well, if media is to be devolved, that covers all broadcasting, because then you're talking about the satellite broadcasters as well. I think the report we produced was a good one. We looked very carefully at a lot of the issues that, and a lot of the evidence, and came up with what I thought was an interesting way forward in terms of devolving broadcasting. But I think devolving broadcasting and media completely is a difficult one, because I'm not sure, I can't think of anywhere else that isn't a sovereign state that controls all broadcasting, whether it's terrestrial or satellite.
Thank you for that. Bethan, did you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, well, that was basically the last report that we produced as a committee, Broadcasting, Welsh Language and Culture Committee. So if you haven't read it yet, I would suggest that you do, because it was the first time that I recall. I know that the Conservatives have come alongside other parties to support the devolution of S4C and other Welsh language broadcasting matters. So I thought that was a pretty strong thing. And we were also recommending lots of changes in terms of putting levies on companies like Google and Facebook to provide more support for local media companies, as well as calling on Welsh Government to enhance the fund that we successfully campaigned on as a committee to support hyperlocals. Senedd Online and such have had good support from Welsh Government as a result of that. Ultimately, my opinion has always been we need to devolve broadcasting. People say, oh, broadcasting, that's quite, an old-fashioned term. But what we mean by that is the platforms that we use in our daily lives. And, yes, Carwyn is right that it poses challenges, but it poses challenges to sovereign countries across the world. For example, when you're making new TV sets and you've got the Netflix button, lots of countries are having to grapple with how they make their own channels see prominence on those networks. So I'm not scared by the prospect of doing that. I would also set up a new Ofcom, so to speak, a Welsh version, because I feel that Ofcom in its current guise has let us down. Commercial radio has been decimated of Welsh language and Welsh content. If you listen to greatest hits radio that used to be Swansea Bay and Swansea Sound, sorry, you know, we've lost a lot of local content. So yes, we're improving hyperlocals. Yes, we're seeing new papers. But if we had that control here, there would be so much more that we could do. And I fail to understand the rationale for us not wanting that within our grasp. Yes, Welsh language is one thing, but not everybody here speaks Welsh. So I would want to have the whole suite of opportunity to be able to influence and discuss and scrutinise politicians, and, you know, for the communities of Wales to talk to each other more about the issues that affect them every day.
Thank you, Bethan. That was really interesting. I'm going to stick with you now because we've had another question in the chat about what is your opinion on the new demographic of members of the Senedd in terms of, you know, the public electing a lot younger politicians into the Senedd?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if we can have a more equal Senedd in terms of representation, that's always good. I mean, there's a first BME MS as well, female MS, sorry, I should say, younger people. I still worry. I mean, obviously Labour has more women, but they're not very diverse, I'm afraid to say. And, you know, the other parties, including my own, we know we've got work to do. It's not good enough, you know. We're talking about issues that affect people in their everyday lives. We need people who represent our communities to get into the Senedd. And if they're not there, sometimes those voices will go amiss, because, you know, let's be frank, politicians have their pet projects, and quite often they go with them. And if we are confident that the Senedd is entirely representative, then we might be less cynical about what happens with the votes that we put forward. So yes, positives on some levels, younger, you know, potentially some more diversity in some places, but, you know, not the 50-50 women equal representation we had a while ago, and we've seen a lot of men in suits standing in front of the Senedd in those pictures, have we not?
I couldn't agree more. And just staying on this question, I don't know, Carwyn, if you had any opinions, because obviously Labour are, you know, really pleased that they have good gender balance in the cabinet, but when it comes to wider diversity such as race and ethnicity, you know, we haven't really seen that. So I just wondered what your opinions are on that.
I agree that the Senedd doesn't fully reflect modern Wales. You know, Bethan's dead right in terms of what she says about representing different communities, and, you know, we've not always been able to ensure the right level of gender balance. I mean, you know, it's difficult to do with an electoral system, but, you know, you could do it with an equal number of candidates. There's one issue I think that has made it more difficult to attract potential candidates, and that is the risk of being elected and losing a seat. The safety net, as it were, is now threadbare compared to the safety net that certainly I enjoyed when I was first elected. And I think I'm hearing now from candidates who are saying to me, well, I've got a job. If I stand for election, I might win. What if I lose my seat in 5 years? Where am I then? And that lack of security, I think, makes it more difficult to attract people who aren't financially secure to begin with. And we don't want the Senedd that's made up of people who, you know, are financially fine and can quite happily, you know, get on with their lives if they lose their seats. So that's a bit of a left field comment, but it's certainly one that I'm starting to hear now. People saying, well, why it's now too much of a risk, and there are good people out there in all parties who can make a real contribution, and those who will miss out the most are those people. Will be those people who we desperately need in order to get that proper reflection of modern Wales.
Cool, thank you for that. So let's just talk about the new cabinet for a second, and I'll direct this question to you, Carwyn. Mark Drayford's, you know, created this new ministerial role of the Minister for Climate Change, and obviously, you know, that's got quite a big portfolio. Do you think that this will bring the desired effect of putting the environment at the forefront of the conversation?
I think it's a very important statement. I mean, There are two things three things you wrestle with when you put a cabinet together. Firstly, personnel, because there's a limit to how many people you can appoint. Secondly, titles. And thirdly, where the boundaries lie between different portfolios. You never get that right, and quite often you have to tweak things even after people have been appointed. But I think that's hugely important. We've talked about climate change for so many years, but to have a dedicated minister whose role it is, Julie, whose role it is to move forward with reducing our carbon footprint is a very strong statement. I looked at the cabinet, and Mark has clearly mixed up experienced people who he's known for a long time. You need those people. You need your people, as it were, in the cabinet, with bringing on some people who are pretty new. And he's tried to make the cabinet as diverse as he can, given the talent pool that he has. So I think it's quite a strong cabinet. In the future, there'll be a need to look at bringing on those people who are newer members to give them the opportunities. But the time for that hasn't come yet. And I think on balance, the cabinet is pretty good. It's well balanced and a good blend of experience with youthful talent. Youthful, by the way, is anybody under 54, I'd say. Age out of.
Thank you for that clarification. And Bethan, if we go to you, what do you think that Plaid Cymru's shadow cabinet will look like?
Oh gosh, I was trying to WhatsApp people because I've obviously left the MS WhatsApp group. That was a day to be crying for. No, I'm joking. So I was trying to find out what was happening. So I'm not 100% knowing yet what their plan is. We tend to not follow directly what the Welsh Government are doing because we need to set our own agenda. We have our own priorities. For example, I saw that Heledd Vychan had raised a question in the Senedd, which is something our committee in the last Senedd also asked for, which was a culture minister in the cabinet, not a deputy. So I would hope to see that Plaid Cymru would follow through with that in any sort of shadow cabinet transition, and I hope that again that they use the talents and the skills that people have taken in to the Senedd with them. So that's something I'll be looking towards, which is exciting as well. So I mean, if I can comment on the cabinet, I would say I was probably disappointed that there was quite a lot of the old guard still there. I think that there could have been a bit of a more risk taken from Mark Drakeford, considering it's not his first decision to make a cabinet. He's had that chance before. So some of them are tired, some of them have been there since the dawn of day, and I think people like Heather David, Jane Bryant, they could have come forward with some new ideas. So yes, it's good that they've got a climate change minister, but they've been in charge of the environment and climate change since the beginning of devolution. So yeah, come on, pull your socks up. Let's see the changes. This isn't a new issue.
Cool. Thank you so much for that, Bethan. That was really, really interesting. Just got a question in the chat from Hugh Clark, who has to head off soon. So I just want to make sure he has his question answered before he goes. And this is for you, Carwyn. Did the inclusion of a new party in the 2016 election in the Senedd up the argument and scrutiny skills of the elected member, or was it a dip in quality for conversation?
What, do we mean the 7 UKIP members?
Yeah, I think so.
No, it was a dip. I can't see how that increased the quality of scrutiny. I think it'd be unfair of me to say that we're all like that. It's something like Mark Reckless. Mark's view was pretty strongly, Westminster centric, but I think he still got a strong role in scrutiny. Others, I think less so. And this was my great worry. If we'd seen some of the abolished people being elected in a 60-member Senedd, the workload on backbenchers is considerable. It's far more than it is in Westminster. And if you have passengers who don't do the work that they should, then that just increases the burden on everybody else. And regardless of whichever party somebody's elected for, it's crucially important that they play either a role in government or a role in scrutiny to make sure that the institution functions properly. If the level of scrutiny are not strong enough, then you don't also get the proper standard of government, because that's what keeps you on your toes. Now, I was in government for a long time. From where I stood, the scrutiny looked pretty strong, actually. When I became a backbencher, I realised that the scrutiny was still strong, but it was hard work. A lot of work needed to be done because there was so few of us to actually do that scrutiny, which is why there's such an argument in favour of increasing numbers. Now, I'm not going to pretend to you this is a popular electoral move to suggest that we should have more politicians, but I think 80, for example, would be the right level if you can get, if you can convince the public that's what you need, because I think then you get a decent number of people who can act in a scrutiny role in parties who are outside government, and that's something that creaks a bit in Wales. It's not as strong as it might be if we had more people to do the job. And that's in no one's interest. It's not in government's interest either. You've got to have that level of scrutiny to keep you on your toes.
No, definitely. And staying on this kind of theme then, so are you saying that Welsh Labour would support the electoral reform system of increasing the Senedd? At the moment that's proposed is for 90 members. Is your party in support of that?
I am merely an ordinary member of my party. No, I couldn't tell you. It's up to the leadership of the party and my colleagues, my former colleagues in the Senate, to make their own minds up. It's a tricky one. There is an argument for 80, 90. I'm not wedded to a particular figure, if I'm honest with you, but it is hugely difficult to get that past the public. I think there has to be some kind of quid pro quo. You might say, for example, well, if we're going to have fewer MPs, if they are going to take our numbers down to 32, that might be the opportunity to increase the number of MSs, and that might be an acceptable quid pro quo. So I think the timing is important. The big issue is how those members are elected. Because parties have strong views on how they should be elected. Parties that do well under existing systems, my own, tend to like the existing system. Parties who would win more seats under a more proportionate system would tend to support that. And I think that's the tricky bit. It's not so much agreeing to the numbers amongst the parties, although the Tories will never agree anything. It's actually agreeing how those people will be elected. That's the, that's where the difficult bit lies.
Bethan, what are your opinions on this?
Well, the starting point for me would be for us all to be elected in the same way, because whatever you say, there's always been that two-tier system, or even that perception. It's still there, even though other politicians who've been elected by constituency don't say it blatantly anymore. It's still a perceived two-tier system. The constituency MSs would have more work than us, that they would be under more pressure than us as regionals. When I think, as we're talking about UKIP and whatever they are, I think it's the effort you put in as an elected politician. I was running around doing as much as I could, but I'm proactive, whereas there may have been others who weren't doing what I would have done. So I think we need to be all elected in the same way, so that you take that heat out of the question. And obviously our party would support a form of STV. It's not just solely based on the fact that we wouldn't win elections by first past the post. It's just the way an election process that we believe is fairer. And then we could have parties that are smaller that we agree with. We could see the Greens, or we could see other parties coming through that may not be from the far right, and I think that's what's given devolution a bad name over the last 5 years, because it was only in Wales as a national institution did we have those type of politicians elected, which solidified our beliefs in what we believed in. Because as much as I didn't like them, to turn up to a debate made me think more about what I believed in and why I believed it. To hear Neil Hamilton go on about the fact that Domino's was selling halal pizza, I wanted to throw a blooming pizza at him for saying such things, but it made me stronger and more passionate. So, I don't want them to be there, don't get me wrong, but I think sometimes in Welsh politics, we can't just all be cushy and nice in a bubble either. We have to, try and get the energy and the passion back in there. And I fear with Labour winning this many seats that it's not going to look like that, because they are very comfortable. They have their narrative, they have their ministerial profiles, there's no need for a coalition. Where does that take us for the next 5 years? The Tories are gutted, you know, because coming second to them does not lead to any power in Wales. And they've been sitting in opposition since the beginning of devolution. Believe me, it's not a good day for them. So what does this mean then for how not only the Welsh Government takes things forward, but for the other parties too?
Thank you for that. So I've got a question for you both, just sticking on the cabinet. So what factors do you think contributed to Labour securing a working majority? And if we go to Carwyn and then Bethan.
I think in some ways I return back to what I said earlier on. You can't coast and win an election. You know, people sometimes, you know, some of my colleagues elsewhere in the UK look at it and say, well, you know, it's Wales, it's going to be Labour, isn't it? Well, it doesn't work that way. I was there in '99 when Plaid were a couple of percentage points behind us and outpolled the SNP actually in Scotland. It didn't seem that way at the time. You do have to work hard at it. You've got to build up a level of credibility, and you've got to explain to people what you're going to do next. And you know, that's the way to do it. And as I said before, I think incumbency did play a far stronger role perhaps in this election than any other election, because there'd been a pandemic. It seemed to me, and this is borne out by the figures, that the majority of people were happy with the way the market handled the pandemic and wanted to stay in charge. And I think that was a very strong factor, because I heard that daily. You know, people saying that to me, you know, yes, we're very happy with Mark Drakeford and the job he's done, so therefore we will be voting Labour. So that was a very strong factor, no question.
Bethan, what do you think were the contributing factors?
I obviously think that a lot of it comes down to resources. You know, we are still a smaller party, and there has to be a greater effort now to fundraise and to election plan earlier and to get branches and teams up and running. I still feel that some areas are amazing at it, and we need to be using that expertise to bring success in other parts of Wales. And show that there's a team of people around the leader that can support him, because, you know, as much as we all have political leaders and know that there's a huge worth in their talents, I also believe that different people will come from different backgrounds and will be able to appeal to different people, use that, go into those types of communities then. I think that is something we have to build on. And also incumbency, as Carwyn has said, I don't need to go over it again. You know, we've used the word change a lot in election broadcasts in the past, and I've always been fearful of putting that front and centre, because I know that Welsh people are quite fearful of change. And I think that during the pandemic as well, you know, people just, you know, we've all lost a bit of confidence. We've all had a tough time. It's all been hugely intimidating. And then to throw in an election into the mix, worried about vaccine processes and things, you know, that is going to play on people's minds when they're going to the ballot box. And so, yeah, incumbency was definitely a thing.
Thank you for that insight. So just looking towards like the comparison with the UK Labour, Carwyn, what lessons do you think that UK Labour could learn from Welsh Labour?
I think it's difficult actually to extrapolate the experience that we've had in Wales and apply them in England. I think that there are particular circumstances in Welsh politics that caused the night to be a successful one for us. The way that we've not shied away from embracing our identity, our national identity as Welsh Labour. That's important, because if people feel that you don't share their identity, they tend not to want to listen to anything else you say. And that's not easy to move to England and apply in England. Incumbency, again, you can't do it. I think part of the problem in the northeast of England particularly is that Conservative voting in the last few years has become wrapped up in national identity. You know, we are English, therefore we vote Conservative. And there is evidence to suggest this, which is where we as a party have lost out, because people seem to think that, you know, voting Conservative is the patriotic thing to do. And if you vote Labour, you're not quite, you know, you're not quite in the same position. How do you get around that? we don't try and compete on that ground. I mean, there's no point, waving flags at each other in the hope that somebody will think that you're a more vigorous flag waver than anybody else. I think that you have to sit down, really deconstruct what your message is, and start appealing more. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed, and I've seen, a lot of vigorous argument within the Labour Party amongst different wings in the party, is that the 2017 general election manifesto was actually quite popular. And it was actually quite a left-wing manifesto, really, one of the most left-wing ones we've had for many, many years, but it was actually quite popular with people. I think if you have the right person leading based on many of those policies, I think you've got something that's a winner, because people may have voted Brexit, but I just don't believe that those people in the northeast of England who voted Brexit voted for a Singapore-style, anything goes, free market, no safety net state. I don't think that's what they voted for. I think for a lot of people, they wanted to have more security, and they wanted to have more job security. They didn't want to see their jobs go to another country. That's what a lot of it was about. And that, I think, is where we have to pitch ourselves. The debate at the moment we've seen in the last few days, Boris Johnson extolling the virtues of free trade. Actually, it's not free trade, it's fair trade for everybody involved. And that's, for example, a place where we should position ourselves as a party. If you have a deal with Australia, a free trade deal with Australia that allows Australian meat in the UK, you can give up on farming in Wales. I mean, it's disastrous. Australia offers us nothing as a market. It's not that big, and it's a long way away. That Father Ted thing, a long way away, and this just not understood in the UK government. Somehow, you can replace the European single market with Australia and New Zealand. They're tiny markets compared to the EU. So we've got a long way to go in some parts of England. Other parts of England were fine. Some parts of the south of England are very good. Bristol, Worthing, of all places, but they are small notes of comfort amongst a pretty disastrous night.
That's really, really interesting. And kind of staying on this topic, we'll bring you into this one as well, Beth, into this question. We've seen this questions come from the chat, saying that we've seen an increased level of visions and plans coming from Westminster over the last 6 months, badged as UK, with little relation or understanding to what's happening in the ground in Wales. And we've seen this with the COVID vaccination programme often being described as UK. So what can the next Welsh Government do to kind of address these issues and to make sure that devolved issues are taken seriously on a UK kind of front? And yeah, if we start with you, Beth, and then we'll bring you in, Carwyn.
Well, I guess that's to do with intergovernmental relations, and I know Carwyn, as a former First Minister, will probably have more insight than me on that, because I think that's key, really, because if they understand who is doing what and how it works, and there's mutual respect, then that can be successful. I fear, though, that there isn't that mutual respect. I've asked many questions in the Senedd, and it's a letter being written to another government official. I mean, sometimes you need to cover your back with a letter, but come on, do they not have conversations? I mean, or is it that the door is closed from Westminster side? Because I fear that it's just their agenda on a UK government level is to roll back on devolution, if nothing else. And that's very scary with this whole flag waving, today's rebranding of the rail line as the Great British Rail or something, whatever it is. It's very, very worrying in terms of what they want to do with the future of even the United Kingdom as it is. And I fear that if they want to stop the SNP, if they want to stop the rise of independence here, for example, or the United Ireland discussion in Ireland, then they have to do more to engage with us and to understand. But I think this also comes down to the media. There's still those media outlets based in London who show no regard or no interest. You tweet them, you DM them, you shout from the rooftops to say to them, what about Wales? And they still don't change their tone. They are London-centric. They live in a bubble. They do not want to understand. That's the key thing here. They don't want to understand anywhere else. And I think that's where then we struggle with relations, whatever colour government it is on a UK level. Unless that mutual respect is there, things fail.
Thank you for that insight. Carwyn, what are your opinions on this?
That mutual respect is not there. The intergovernmental machinery that exists is hopeless. There's no mechanism really where governments can sit down and agree a common way forward, and that's bound to happen. I mean, that happens at the European Union level. Why wouldn't it happen in the UK if there are areas where there's no dispute? But there's no mechanism for doing that at all. And it seems to me that the current UK government has moved. Their view is, well, in the past, the way that Westminster has dealt with the other nations of the UK is throw powers at the Celts to make them go away. Now it's almost throw money at the Celts to make them become more British. That's just the way it is. But what they don't seem to realise is that by doing that, you run all over people's sensibilities. You can't. We see it this week. This discussion about having a free port in Wales, and whether you're in favour or you're not in favour. The UK government lined up, 2 Welsh MPs. One MP for Jen was always up for being given a question to ask of a minister that's helpful about free ports. Can you bypass the Welsh government? It's crackers. Either the UK is based on mutual respect, despite differences in views amongst the different governments, or it's a steamroller. A Westminster steamroller that seeks to run all over everybody else. If it's the latter, it won't exist. The UK will eventually, it'll crack, because you can't force people to be something that they don't want to be. You can persuade people, you can talk to people, you can show people respect, and that's the way to win them over. But trying to run all over them, which is what this current UK government is doing, is not the way to do it. And as I said before, that the greatest recruiter for Yes Cymru is Boris Johnson. And the way he's carrying on, he'll continue to be the best recruiter for Yes Cymru.
Yeah, that is a really, really great insight. So I think I'll have a final few questions from me, so we can finish at 7. And after I ask this question, please feel free, anyone in the audience, to turn your camera off and turn your mic off and ask a question directly, if anything you feel like hasn't been covered. I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I think one thing I'm keen to ask is about the younger vote in Wales. So obviously 16 and 17-year-olds had the vote for the first time, which was a real opportunity, really, really exciting. But obviously we know from figures there's been really low voter turnout. Bethan, I know a lot of the Plaid Cymru manifesto had a lot of policies targeting young people. Welsh Labour had, 1 or 2, I think. But what do you think should have been done, or what do you think political parties should be doing in the future to engage younger voters?
Yeah, I mean, it is very exciting for that to have happened here in Wales, and for younger people to get out and vote. And I was listening to Radio Wales on the day of election, and young people saying how excited they were that they were going out to vote, and that made me so happy that the younger generation were pleased to be able to take part in our democracy. I think we have to look at everything in a context, don't we? Again, the pandemic, parties weren't able to go out on an equal basis to talk to schools. It was very difficult to garner that interest because of the way in which education was being run during this last year. So I am hopeful for the next election in that the educational team in the Commission and political parties themselves will be wise to wanting to get into schools. And obviously the new curricula, which will allow for more discussion on politics and political issues. What I would say is keep a close eye on what is happening, because I struggled a lot to get into schools. I'm sorry to say, Carwyn, if there was a school that was mostly in a Labour area, sometimes the head teachers may have their own allegiances, and they didn't let me into the school. For example, there was a school in Nice, I won't name them. They had one politician in, talk down independence for a whole afternoon. A young person asked for me to be able to go in the following month. And the head teacher said no. And I think, we have to be able to allow our young people to be respected and that they have the political debate, not just talking about the processes and the bureaucracy of politics. That's only going to spark interest so far. They want to be able to talk about the issues and why they believe in a certain political party over another. So yes, we may have had more about young people in our manifestos, but we need that to resonate, and we need to young people to be able to talk about politics freely, not just in schools, in their youth clubs, in their everyday lives, down the park. You know, that's when we know we've won, when it's not just the language of the school.
Carwyn, what are your thoughts on this?
Sadly, I'm not surprised that the turnout wasn't higher amongst younger voters. I think much what Bethan has said is right. You know, I've over the years taken part in debates, or not recently. I think part of the problem has been that when I remember, you know, 99, 2003, having debates with the other candidates in schools. I think then some of the candidates who then started to stand were of the far right, and schools were a little bit concerned about having to invite them in as well. And those debates seemed to tail off. You know, I spent a lot of my time going to schools. One thing I never did was promote my party. I never thought that was right. You know, if you were going there as an MS, you were there to answer questions, not convince youngsters to vote Labour. That wasn't my job. And I thought that I didn't want to be too partisan, but it is difficult if you can't go to schools and have a debate amongst candidates to actually raise the level of awareness amongst young people. A lot of young people don't know how to vote, and they don't know how to vote because their parents don't vote. You know, there was a generation at one time where, you know, turnout would be 85, 90%, and they would have their own children, and they would say, this is how you vote. But what I found with some young people is I'd say, well, you know, it's easy, and they say, well, my parents don't vote either, so I don't know how to do it. So because they didn't have that example either, and that's quite a challenge. Look, there were 4 voters in my household. My daughter's 20, my son's 18, right? They've been registered as postal voters deliberately, so I can make sure they vote. Because I know for a while, trying to drag them to the polling station on polling day would be a running battle. And, you know, I don't tell them how to vote. It's up to decide how they vote. What's important to me is that they vote. And there you're talking about somebody, you know, two children, or not children, they're adults, of somebody whose dad has been in politics almost all his life. And even to get them to vote is a challenge. So for people who don't live in households where politics isn't seen as important, it's even more difficult. But again, you know, the worry I always have, and this has been the case for many years now in politics, is older people vote, younger people tend not to vote. If that culture takes hold in the thinking of political parties, and even subconsciously, political parties are going to skew their manifestos more towards the demographic that votes, and that cannot be a good thing for society.
Definitely. So I think we've all heard enough from me. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? Anything they feel like hasn't been covered? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. When I see you put your hand up.
I'm being super keen. So I just wanted to ask, I'm talking to a lot of different clients in my day job about the best way to engage with the Senedd and Welsh Government. A lot of different clients from a lot of different ranges of backgrounds, but obviously business is a really key one. Do you think, I guess this is a question for both of you, do you think that the new Welsh Government is really keen on engaging with businesses at the moment? Is there a way that businesses can cut through the noise in how they engage? Or is it a time where, you know, they're going to be really hyper-focused on COVID and maybe people should wait until they have something really specific to talk about? Or do they just want to hear from business on how they think everything's been and approaches going forward? Maybe Carwyn, will start with you and then...
Yeah, no, thanks, Gwyneth. Look, governments do want to hear from businesses, but there have to be the proper channels for that. There's huge nervousness in government about dealing with professional lobbying companies directly. You know, that does leave you open to criticism if you do that. Ask David Cameron. You know, that's what I just cannot understand why someone would do that. I mean, I'm not in politics, and I'd never lobby. Even if I was allowed to do it, and because I just think it doesn't look right as far as the public are concerned. So governments will deal with businesses. You haven't got a monopoly of wisdom when you're in government. You need to pick up on ideas from outside, and you do that by listening to people. But that has to be through forums such as the Council for Economic Development, if that's still there. Do you know if it is? And the the forum that are set up between government and business. It's more difficult if you're working in public affairs. It's much more difficult to influence a minister. And you know this yourselves because the government ministers won't meet you, but backbenchers can be influenced, and it's not a question of influence. It's informed in many ways, and if you can get backbenchers informed about the feelings of businesses that you work for, then that's something that they can take on board, and that's something that they can raise questions of with ministers. But there was always it's just you'll never have a government minister. Well, you shouldn't have a government minister meeting with a client of a lobbying company. That's too difficult for everybody involved.
Yeah. Oh no, to be clear, it's definitely not that kind of a situation. It's more giving advice to people on how best and training to engage with the Welsh Government in general. I would love to hear your thoughts, Bethan, on how businesses can engage with the Welsh Senedd.
Yeah, obviously I wouldn't have the experience of government, but what I will say, just to declare interest, my husband runs a business in Cardiff, and I think there's room for change. He struggles to get positive communication from Welsh Government, and quite often, the truth be told, a lot of the decisions are made by civil servants, and the ministers feel quite out of the loop often, at least when I've spoken to ministers on other issues, not to do with my husband's company, I should just say, that sometimes they feel frustrated if they don't have a budget that they would like to be able to use. I know that there wasn't a very big budget for the international minister's portfolio, which was scrapped. If you're going to create a cabinet, you need to create one with support. So I would say that needs to change, especially post-pandemic, because everybody's struggling and everybody wants that advice. So I hope that the new constituted economy committee, or whatever that'll look like, so you not only go to your backbenchers, but you go to those structured committees, because I think they're underestimated quite often, that you can call on them to do a specific inquiry on something, and that can come to fruition and make key changes. So do that if you can't get through to government ministers directly.
Great, thank you so much both for that.
Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask?
Everybody wants to go and have their drinks.
Yeah, they do. So I'll wrap up the meeting now, and just a final question from me. And I just wanted to know how you both feel now you've stepped away, and if you have any specific plans for the future. Shall we start with you, Carwyn?
It's weird. I had 3 years to prepare for it, because I announced in 2018. I knew in 2016 I wouldn't stand again, because my term as First Minister was bound to come to an end in the term just gone. I wasn't going to stand again in 2021 as a party leader, so I knew 2021 would be my final year. So I had time to get used to it, but it was still it was odd when people started going back, and I was there on the Friday of the election count. In the night, I went to do a program for ITV in the Senedd, and of course I haven't got a pass anymore, so I had to go through security, which they apologized for. Then I beeped as I went through security as well, so I had to be hand searched. So that was a strange experience. And when I left, I thought, God, I'm not coming back here. And it did hit me then how odd that felt. Something that's been at the heart of my life for so long, even though I'd had plenty of time to prepare for it. But future, I do various different things at the moment. I think they call it a portfolio. So some of it is pro bono work, charity. Some of it is paid work. Some writing, some broadcasting, some business consultancy work. So it's a bit of everything, really. I can't retire. 54. So yeah, still things to do. But one thing I do know is I'll go back to the Senedd. Obviously, that's, I think you put that. I'm a lot older than Beth, and she's got her chances in the future. But my time is gone. But who knows where life will take you in the future. I spent all my life over the past 22 years thinking about, you know, what's going to happen in the next few months. What about the next, all that sort of strategy and planning and thinking, and you almost wish you want your life away doing that. So it'd be quite nice not to start thinking more about, well, hang on, just think about the here and now for a while, rather than constantly thinking about, you know, where will I be in 5 years' time, which is what I did really for most of my working life. It takes to slow down, but I'm getting there.
No, that's really good to hear, and I hope you enjoy the slowing downness of life. Bethan, how about you?
Definitely not slowing down with a 1-year-old, I can tell you. It's more challenging than politics. Hands up to all parents, they high five, you know, it's amazing, but it's hard. And so the decision I made was, I didn't feel, and I respect every woman who does go back to work after raising a baby, but I just didn't feel I could do it. It's 24/7, it's on demand, it's become a lot more toxic. I'm not enjoying, you know, the constant criticism and finger pointing. It's just depressing. A lot of it I loved going out to community groups, I loved campaigning, I loved talking to new people, don't get me wrong, but you know, I wanted to put my mental health first and my son and my family, so that's the decision I made. And people say, oh yeah, you know, you can go back, but then as Carwyn will know, it takes planning, you know, I can't just go, oh yeah, you know, somebody will want me back in 5 years' time as if I'm some sort of, you know, goddess, you know, there's other people there now, there's other candidates, you know, things will change. And somebody told me recently, if you don't do something in the next 6 months, you will be a non-entity. You've got to keep yourself out there. So I want to slow down, but I also am conscious that I don't want to be doing, you know, I want to be getting back out there at some stage in the future. So how do I do that? What can I offer? So, you know, I'm just exploring opportunities and going to lots of baby groups still. So I'm not going to put too much pressure on myself, because I'm really hopeful that the new Senedd will be something to look forward to and to follow. You know, I'm looking at Senedd TV, and it is difficult. You know, I'm not going to say, sometimes I'm really sad that I'm not there. Other days I'm jubilant when I see some of the, you know, stuff going around social media. So, you know, I think me and Carwyn will have those days where we really miss it, and then other days where we think we're well out of it.
Oh, thank you so much, both of you. And yeah, just thank you again for joining us. Your insight has been really interesting and really good ground covered. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you all the best for the future. And I'm sure this won't be the last of you both, even though you both say it might be. But yeah, we look forward to seeing what you do and yeah, continue to do for the people of Wales. And thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. It's been really great to have you with us, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your days. Good night.
Thank you for inviting me.
Good night.